Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday Apocryphal Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Friday Apocryphal and podcast. And boy, do we have a show for you today. Today we are covering First Maccabees chapters 7 through 9.
You said chapters.
Well, I mean,
I know they're chapters, but
they are chapters.
I know that.
What were you
But
thinking,
you
Psalms?
could just be 7 through 9.
We could be covering verses 7 through 9.
That's 3 verses.
It's an unnecessary vagueness.
Do you know what?
No, it's
You're
not. It's
both
not really that
right
vague.
and beautiful. Now move on.
So before we hop into the show proper, we have a lot of new books.
Yeah, we do.
So here is the first one, and we're going to be using it quite a lot today. So this is volume 4 of and actually this is also from the New Interpreter's Bible. This is volume 4 of the New Interpreter's Bible commentary.
Yes.
Here it is.
Oh my gosh, it's green.
Oh, it's right. It's green.
But the text isn't, so it's just floating text. It's beautiful.
Wonderful. How
That's amazing.
fantastic.
I love it.
You know, it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
But
So Landon actually purchased this along with a good amount of other books for us.
not just
So,
a good amount of books, a shitload of books.
yeah, thank you, Landon. Landon, you are fantastic.
Yes, thank you, Landon.
So it's this. There are some books for Chris and his Saints series.
Yes, thank you.
He also got, here is the commentary on Second Maccabees. This is the Hermenia commentary on Second Maccabees.
Apparently
Yes.
this color of yellow is pretty close to green.
And in addition to that,
We also have 2 commentaries from, also from the Hermenia series of Jubilees as well.
yep.
So once we
which
get to
we'll
Jubilees,
cover when we do Jubilees.
Yeah.
Probably after Second Maccabees.
that or,
Sirach.
yeah.
Is that
Either
that
way.
hilarious one.
No,
No,
not that one.
That one's a sequel to this one, kind of.
Actually, I feel
What's it called again? Balam? Sass?
no,
or
the Alphabet of Ben Sira is the one that you're thinking.
Alphabet of Ben Sira.
Yeah, I feel like that one would be a really fun one to cover,
Yeah.
because oh my god, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's intended to be, I'm sure.
Yeah. But we thanked we're done thanking you, Landon.
Thanks,
No,
Landon.
no
For
more
now.
thanks.
I'm gonna thank you just to spite Lawrence.
So
I'll
let's
thank you later, and you won't even know when it's coming.
Let's hop into the show. What translation are we using?
We are using the Anchor Bible version of First Maccabees, a new translation with introduction and commentary by Jonathan A. Goldstein.
And of course, we have his commentary and translation of Second Maccabees as well. Yep.
Right here.
Yep. And although we're not going to be using it anymore, the New Interpreter's Bible Old Testament Survey, we also have that. We use that in the first show.
Yes.
We have Erdman's commentary on the Bible, and obviously Volume 4 of the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary.
Yep. We have all those. We have more stuff too.
Yeah,
but
we're not going to be
using
that.
No.
No.
Not at all.
No. But either way, we can hop.
Unless, have you checked the Oxford Companion to the Bible?
Dude, we already know there's not going to be anything useful in there.
Watch it have some incredible.
It's
useful
probably not going to
information.
have anything
Oh,
useful.
yeah.
I really doubt
The
it.
one time you don't check it.
Well, I guess we'll see eventually.
Yep, eventually. Well, why don't I get us started off with chapter 7, the high priest Alcimus and the campaign of Nicanor. In the year 151, Demetrius, son of Seleucus, left Rome, sailed with a handful of men to one of the coastal cities, and there made himself king.
So let's talk about Demetrius for a little bit, because that's going to be this entire section, really, not just the stuff we're covering today, but the stuff we're going to be covering for a few more chapters afterwards. Basically start introducing a lot of new people. So we should definitely talk about some of these.
Yes,
So-
there is a bit actually in the commentary. Well, obviously, there's like a ridiculous amount of commentary, but there is a bit that isn't too long. It's only 2 paragraphs about this first verse. So,
I mean, how about this? I say my really short things, and then you can.
okay, you do your short things. I'll hop into this long thing.
Okay. So, from Erdmans, Demetrius, born 186 BC, was the son of Seleucus IV and had been a hostage in Rome since 175 BC. On Antiochus IV's death, the Roman Senate had refused Demetrius's request for recognition as heir. In 162 BC, a Roman commissioner investigating Seleucid rearmament ordered the destruction of the elephants and the navy and was assassinated. This was an embarrassment to Antiochus V and Lysias. Of course, we learned a good amount about them last time.
Yes.
And Demetrius, perhaps seeing his opportunity, escaped from Rome with some help from the later historian Polybius and landed, probably in autumn 162 BC at Tripolis.
Thank you, Landon.
Hmm?
You said Landon, right? What was that guy's name?
What the guy's name? Polybius?
And there were a bunch of names. I heard Landon in there.
No, I said landed.
Landed. Well, I still had to thank Landon later, and no one would see when it was coming.
Okay.
Wow.
He
did it.
So, anyways, he landed at Tripolis in autumn of 162 BC with 16 men. Clearly, the army supported him and killed Lysias and Antiochus. And then I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah.
The stuff about Polybius.
Yeah.
That's actually also noted here in the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary. Demetrius the First Soter, the son of Seleucus IV and nephew of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who, by the way, is like the main antagonist in the book of Daniel, had been a hostage at Rome, pretty much all the same stuff. This pretty much just goes over exactly the same thing, including when Polybius helped him out.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Cool.
it's all that stuff.
Some of that is in here. It says victory over Philip in 162 BCE did not end the troubles of Antiochus V and his guardian Lysias. A Roman embassy led by Gnaeus Octavius came to enforce full compliance with the Peace of Apamea, imposed in 188 after the Romans had crushingly defeated the Seleucid Empire. In particular, the warships and elephants were also destroyed. They were offended. We get that worship, the elephant story.
Sure.
The historian Polybius was a close friend of Demetrius and tells how Demetrius fruitlessly pleaded with the Senate to release him and recognize him as the legitimate heir to the Seleucid Empire. The Romans, however, preferred that the Seleucid Empire be under the weak regime of Lysias and Antiochus V rather than in the hands of the vigorous Demetrius. Polybius describes in detail Demetrius's dramatic escape in Rome. In the year 151, in the autumn of 162 BCE, it says to see Bickerman, but we don't have Bickerman.
We don't.
No, but it says Antiochus V still appears as a king in a Babylonian cuneiform document dated October 17th, 162 BCE. However, Demetrius seized power by force and was still in Antioch in the autumn of 161. There was nothing to compel the Seleucid authorities in Babylon to recognize him. Indeed, the rebel satrap of Media, Timarchus, was to seize control of the area until he was crushed by Demetrius in the winter of 161/0.
Yeah, and he kind of goes into that here. The Roman Senate did not at first recognize Demetrius, and it kept up contact with rebellious elements in the Seleucid Empire. Timarchus, the satrap of Babylonia, and his brother Heraclides, satrap of Media, did not recognize Demetrius. Ptolemaeus, satrap of Commagene, I think that's how you say it, also led a revolt. Timarchus was not defeated until late 161 or early 160 BCE. It is within this context of Demetrius' attempt to gain control over a fragmenting Seleucid empire that one must place the events of chapter 7.
Excellent. Well, with that being said, let's get into the second verse.
Great.
As he was marching on the Seleucid capital, the soldiers seized Antiochus and Lysias, intending to deliver them up to him. When the news reached Demetrius, he said, "Do not let me see their faces." Accordingly, the soldiers slew them, and Demetrius became undisputed king. Then all the sinful and wicked men of Israel came before him, led by Alcimus, who wanted to be high priest. They brought charges against their people, telling the king, "Judas and his brothers have killed all your friends, and he has driven us from our land. Now, therefore, send a man whom you trust and have him go view all the havoc Judas has wreaked upon us and upon the king's domains, and have him punish Judas and his men and all their abettors." The king chose Maccabees, one of the friends of the king, governor of the Trans-Euphrates province, a leading man in the kingdom, and one loyal to the king. He sent him with the wicked Alcimus, whom he confirmed in the high priesthood, with orders to wreak vengeance on the Israelites.
So here's actually something interesting. We were talking about Alcimus and how he wanted to be high priest. The writer of Second Maccabees also reports that Alcimus was already high priest before the time of Demetrius the First Soter, whereas the writer of First Maccabees claims that Alcimus went to Demetrius requesting to be high priest.
Mm-hmm. Also, I like how these wicked men of Israel, basically what they're trying to do is to sacrifice Judas as like a proxy so that the wrath of the new king doesn't come down on them.
And here's something that's really weird. If there was this period of time where there was no high priest, who the hell was doing the sacrifices?
Right.
Because they had just restored the temple.
Yeah. You would figure
that
they
would already have one.
Well, maybe they just killed that one.
Oh, yeah.
He sent him with the wicked Is it Alcimus or Alcimus?
I mean, I say Alcimus, but it might be Alcimus. I have no idea.
I'm going to say Alcimus. And I'm going to say that if you viewers donate any money, it goes towards our Alchemy Drive, which we are doing once we hit $666 in donations.
We are pretty much, I think we're a little bit under $100 away now.
Yeah, we're getting close.
$4 under.
Okay, so they set out on the march with a large force against the land of Judah. Maccabees sent a message to Judas and his brothers, treacherously couched in peaceful terms. However, Judas and his brothers paid the messengers no heed, for they saw how large a Seleucid force had come. Nevertheless, an assembly of men learned in the Torah gathered before Alcimus and Maccabees to seek justice. The pietists. What are pietists?
Oh, those are the people that are pious.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's just a bad. I would not use the term
Me
pietists.
neither.
Well, while reading through some research on saints, I have concluded that there have been so many poorly named religious organizations of minor merit in so many local areas that just went around with real. Yeah, you should just look at it. They're hilarious. How many of them have bad names?
Yeah.
Like the Covetists. What do? They covet stuff. Is that good? I don't know. But they're a group. There are like 200 of them in Italy in the 1740s. It's not very important or noteworthy, but they have a bad name is what I'm saying.
It's a sin.
Yeah, Chris just started reading recently, and now he's really excited that he can share information.
I read all the time. I just don't read stuff specific to this usually. That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, the pietists took the lead men among the Israelites in seeking peace at their hands, saying, A man who is a priest of the stock of Aaron has come with their force. He will not wrong us.
What verse are you on?
I am on verse 14.
Okay. So actually, there's a note here about verse 13. The translation of verse 13 should read, the Hasidians, or the Hasidim, were the first or leaders among the sons of Israel, and they were seeking peace from them. So there's that.
Yeah, there's a note on here. The note says, after their bitter experiences with the Hellenizing high priest Menelaus, how could the pietists have put such trust in the mere fact of priestly descent? Some pious Jews did deny that Menelaus was of priestly stock. However, Menelaus, brother of Simon of the clan of Bilgah, probably was of legitimate priestly stock. Our author may have known of pietists who conceded the fact of Menelaus's priestly descent. If so, we must change the translation of our verse. Literally, the Greek has the pietists saying, a man, a priest of the stock of Aaron. In the Hebrew of the time, Lord priest or lordly priest appears to have been precisely is Kohen, the form of address, my Lord High Priest.
Isaac Cohen?
I guess. It's just is Kohen.
Okay.
Ist Kohen Gadol is my Lord High Priest. Priestly descent was indelible, but by his base conduct, Menelaus could have forfeited his right to be called lordly by pietists. Only a lordly priest, like Alchemists, deserved trust. If so, our verse should be translated, a lordly priest of the stock of Aaron.
Sweet.
Yeah. But anyways, they're basically like, hey, this guy's a descendant of Aaron. That means he's good.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, is there really any other reason to be a priest?
No.
You just need to be a Levite. That's about it.
That's a descendant of Aaron.
I know.
Definitely. That's all you need. Indeed, Alchemists spoke with them in peaceful terms and swore to them that we intend no harm to you or your friends. As soon as he had won their trust, however, he arrested 60 of them and had them executed all in a single day.
So, yeah.
In accordance with the verse which he himself wrote, quote, the bodies and blood of your saints they have poured out around Jerusalem, and there is no one to bury them, end quote.
Yeah, so the note here is that Alcimus, goes back on his oath. A similar execution of Jewish leaders was carried out by the Babylonians at the fall of Jerusalem in 586. Because, I think, we talked about that they made a deal, but then immediately, pretty much backed out of it. It didn't really matter.
I don't feel like it was this immediate, but it was very immediate. This felt like Rick and Morty instant crime level immediate. Like it was me, I did it kind of level. You know what I mean?
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
No, it was really fast, is all I'm saying.
It was fast. I'm definitely agreeing with you.
Psalms. There's a note here.
Did you read verse 17 yet?
Yeah, I read verse 17, and there's a note here.
Okay, because I also have some stuff for 17.
That says Psalm 79.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it says Psalm 79, 2 through 3 says, they have given the dead bodies of thy servants to be food unto the fowls of the heaven, the flesh of thy saints unto the beasts of the earth.
Yeah, so I'm going to read this little section here. The fate of the Hasidians is said to fulfill Psalm 79, 2 through 3. Note that faithful ones, Hasidim, is the same word that the NRSV translates as your faithful in Psalm 79, 2. And so a linguistic connection is being made between the people who have been killed and the words of the psalm. And then actually, to kind of continue, on that same road. Goldstein, surprise, surprise, we have his commentary. Goldstein argues that the Greek text credits the words of the quotation in 7:17 to Alcimus, to Alcimus himself, and that therefore Psalm 79 was written by Alcimus himself. I just think that's no. With reference to the events of 169 or 168 BC. Psalms 74, 79, and 83 have often been dated to the Maccabean period. Alternatively, the author may understand the unnamed subject of the verb wrote to be God.
Well, there's actually a quite lengthy argument.
I'm sure he does have an argument.
And I'll go into a little bit of it. Our verses say with emphasis that Alcimus himself wrote Psalm 79, 2-3. Our author loses no love over Alcimus and would not credit him with writing words revered by the pious unless Alcimus was in fact the author of the verses. The verses could hardly have been written in isolation. Alcimus must have written them in a context. Either the words in Psalm 79 are borrowed from Alcimus, or Alcimus borrowed them from Psalm 79, or Alcimus himself wrote Psalm 79. As we shall see, the content of Psalm 79 reflects events of 169 or 167, so that the author of Psalm 79 did not merely borrow words from Alcimus, he was Alcimus. Indeed, the ancient commentators already regarded Psalm 79 as a prophecy of Antiochus's persecution. See Eusebius Demonstrato Evangelica, Athanasius Exposito in Psalmum. And modern scholars have often suggested that the psalm was written then. Since the recognition that Alcimus wrote Psalm 79 leads to much interesting information about the man, this is the place for presenting the available details on him. First, however, we must establish our interpretation of verses 16 and 17. Already, ancient scribes recognized that verse 17 is a free quotation of Psalm 79, 2-3. For LAG, ascribes verse 17 to Asaph, the supposed author of Psalm 79, as does Eusebius Demonstratio Evangelica.
Yeah, but the whole thing about it is it's one of the communal laments, and I mean, so in Erdman's, we've covered this before, but it dates it to the time of the exile. I highly doubt that a psalm that would have been written so late would have had as much influence.
Okay, well, then he goes into this linguistic argument, but he says here, in fixing the text of the end of verse 16, modern editors have been correct in taking as most reliable the unidiomatic original text, ton logon hon egraph sen atan, literally the verse which he wrote it. According to Rolfs, the reading is exhibited by at least one minuscule as well. This reading, however, is impossible Greek unless it is Greek distorted by a translator's intent to be literal. Moreover, this Greek would reflect impossible Hebrew, and our author was a good Hebraist. Idiomatic Hebrew would have had either in accordance with the verse which he wrote, or as is written. There is no way in which the original reading of this could have arisen unless the Greek translator wrote the text which we have taken as the basis for our translation, hon egrapsen autos, reflecting an idiomatic Hebrew original ser hu katab. Christian scribes, horrified at the suggestion that someone other than David or Asaph wrote Psalm 79, labored mightily to correct or obscure the text. The original reading of this already has changed the nominative emphatic pronoun autos himself.
Do you think Goldstein just wants to, keep it in the family, so to speak? Like he wants to keep it biblical? Like, because one of his contentions was, the Christians get pretty uppity if, someone other than David or Asaph wrote the psalm.
Well, he's talking about how later manuscripts have been edited to change it so it doesn't say that he wrote it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. But either way, that book's like when, from the 80s?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's from 76.
76.
Yeah.
This is an interesting bit here. The scribes may have felt that
So I'm going to go with outdated, but...
Yeah. The scribes may have felt that our author meant to say that Alchemist quoted Psalm 79 in writing. But the most natural interpretation even of their text is that Alchemist was the author of the verse. Other scribes were quick to supply the prophet or David or Asaph as the subject of wrote. Perhaps before their eyes still stood the reading of he himself, as they interpreted it much as a pious Epicurean would take he himself to refer to Epicurus.
I mean, like, I get what he's trying to say, but I really doubt it. There's not enough information. And the first thing is, this isn't like a quotation,
Right.
of the psalm.
Right.
So I don't really. I don't think his argument really follows.
All right.
But anyways,
the fear and dread of them seized the entire people as they said to one another, "There is no truth or justice among them. They have violated their pledge and their sworn oath." Thereafter, Maccabees left Jerusalem and encamped at Beth-Zaith. There he sent out orders and had many of the turncoats who had gone over to him arrested, as well as some of our people. He had all these butchered by the great cistern and their bodies cast into it. After putting the country under the control of Alchemists and leaving him with troops to assist him, Maccabees returned to the king. Alchemists then faced a struggle for the high priesthood, in which, however, all the troublers of their people rallied to him, overran the land of Judah, and inflicted a great defeat upon Israel. Judas saw all the harm that Alchemists and his supporters had done to Israelites, far worse than anything the Gentiles were doing. Accordingly, he went around to the entire territory of Judea, punishing the turncoats so that they shrank from going out into the countryside. When Alchemists saw the growing strength of Judas and his men, knowing that he could not cope with them, he went again to the king and accused them of atrocities. Thereupon, the king sent Nicanor, one of his high-ranking officers, a hater and foe of Israel.
a hater?
Hater's gonna hate.
He called him a hater.
Yep.
Wow, that's classic.
Ah, amazing. I love it. Okay, this should be on a shirt, right?
Yeah.
Nicanor is a hater.
Yep. Nicanor, a hater and
Hashtag
foe of Israel.
Nicanor is a hater.
Yep.
Anyways, so here's some notes on Nicanor.
Wait, let me finish this sentence.
Sure.
A hater and foe of Israel with orders to exterminate our people.
Of course. What verse is that, by the way?
That was verse 26.
Okay, cool. So Nicanor, possibly, but not certainly the Nicanor of 338, is not here given particularly high rank, but in 2 Maccabees 14:12 is commander of the elephants and is made governor of Judea. So that's a huge difference.
Mm.
Yeah, and here's a little bit more on if it's the same Nicanor or not. So Nicanor was a fairly common name, and so this is unlikely to be the same Nicanor mentioned in 338, or the Nicanor who helped Demetrius flee from Rome.
All right. Nicanor entered Jerusalem with a large force and sent a message to Judas and his brothers, treacherously couched in peaceful terms. "Let there be no strife between us. I propose to come with a few men for a peaceful meeting with you." When he came to Judas, though the two men exchanged peaceful greetings, the enemy were already making plans to kidnap Judas. Judas, however, got wind of the fact that Nicanor's visit was a treacherous plot against him. Wary of Nicanor, he refused to have any further meetings with him. Nicanor perceived that his plot had been detected. Accordingly, he marched out to meet Judas in a battle near Chafar Salama. There, about 500 of Nicanor's men fell, and his army fled to the city of David.
So the exact location of Safar Salama is unknown, but it probably lies between Jerusalem and the Gufna Hills.
Yes. Oh, by the way, happy Friday the 13th.
Yes,
people.
happy Friday the 13th.
I wanted
here.
to do a gag where I came in with a hockey mask and like macheted Lawrence, but we don't have a hockey mask or machete ready, unfortunately.
You should have asked me to bring my machete.
Yeah, you probably would have sharpened it.
Would you not?
How are you going to cut down trees and large vines? That's what
Or
machetes are
humans.
for. No, that's not what they're designed for. They get stuck in those.
Hey, Susan, that was a joke.
Yeah, we're not condoning murder.
No, we are not.
No.
Oh, but the hashtag blame the Bible. Anyways,
The Bible
sorry,
does.
Susan, don't demonetize us.
Yes.
is that our name for YouTube?
No, Susan is the CEO.
Yeah, she's the CEO.
Oh, okay.
I
So
bet
just YouTube.
I bet Susan has never seen our show.
No, definitely not.
Well, hey, Susan, if you're enjoying the show so far.
We'll do it later. We'll tell her afterwards.
Yep. Sometime thereafter, Nicanor went up to Mount Zion. Some priests came out of the sanctuary along with some elders of the people to greet him peacefully and show him the burnt offering which was being sacrificed on behalf of the king.
So the priests and elders demonstrate their loyalty by pointing to the burnt offerings made twice daily on the king's behalf. Cross-reference Ezra 6:10, it was the cessation of such sacrifices on behalf of Rome that were taken to mark the beginning of hostilities in the year 66. That was the pretty much the beginning of the Jewish war.
Ah.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about.
We'll get to it much later.
Yeah.
In the New Testament stuff, we'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it eventually. He, however, mocked them, laughing in their face and rendering them unclean with his spit. Presumptuously he spoke, angrily swearing that, unless Judas and his army are delivered over into my hands immediately, upon my victorious return I shall burn this temple. Then he went out in a hot rage. Thereupon the priests went in and stood before the altar and the nave. Weeping, they said, "You have chosen this house to bear your name, to be a house of prayer and entreaty for your people. Take vengeance upon this man and upon his army, and make them fall by the sword. Remember their blasphemies, and let none of them survive." Very few prayers in Maccabees.
Yeah,
Very few God references, even.
But for this section, the author uses the language of the Psalms, particularly Psalm 44:13 and 86, to describe how Nicanor mocks the priests. And he also notes that Nicanor defiles the priests, as Antiochus IV had ordered the sanctuary to be defiled. Nicanor's threat to destroy the temple echoes the destruction of the first temple, which we covered.
All right. So, Nicanor marched out from Jerusalem and encamped at Beth Horon, where he was joined by a force from Syria. Judas encamped at Adasa with 3,000 men. There Judas prayed, quote, "Long ago, when a king's emissaries blasphemed, your angel went forth and slew 185,000 of the king's men. In the same manner, crush this army before us today. Let all other men know that Nicanor has blasphemed against your sanctuary. Pass judgment on him in accordance with his wickedness."
So what verse was that you just finished?
I just finished verse 42, but verse 41 also included the start of the prayer.
Sure.
And there is
I got a quick note on
commentary
it.
in here. 41 says, "So well known and appropriate was the story of Sennacherib's repulse from Jerusalem that our author does not have to name the king mentioned in Judas's prayer."
Yeah. Actually, that was the note here. The prayer before battle, which is ascribed to Judas, picks up on the reference in the priest's prayer to the blasphemies of Nicanor by remembering how Sennacherib's army had uttered similar blasphemies when the Assyrians besieged Jerusalem in 701 BCE. In that encounter, the angel of the Lord is said to have struck down the Assyrians. And that language, struck down, we're going to see it later too.
Yeah.
But that is specifically a godly language, I should say.
Oh yeah, it's like
Yeah.
smite.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
smitten.
Stricken. Yeah,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Those are all whatever way God
Something of
kills them.
God's
However,
power, yeah.
Bears, disease, angels, flaming swords, whatever.
The armies joined battle on the 13th of the month Adar, and the army of Nicanor was defeated, but he himself being the first to fall in battle. When Nicanor's army saw that he had fallen, they threw away their arms and fled. Judas and his men pursued them as far as the approaches of Gezerah, 1 day's journey from Adasa, and sounded the signal trumpets in the enemy's rear. In response to the signal, men came out of all the neighboring villages of Judea and struck all the flanks of the enemy and wheeled about to meet Judas and his men, so that the enemy all fell by the sword. Not even one of them was left. Taking the spoils and the booty, the victors cut off the head of Nicanor and his right hand, which he had so presumptuously raised in oath, and brought and raised them where they could be viewed from Jerusalem. The people were overjoyed and observed the day as a day of great rejoicing. They decreed that the day the 13th of Adar should be observed annually. There followed a brief period of peace for the land of Judah.
So here's a note here. The treatment of this slain king recalls such incidents from Israel's past. King Saul's body was fastened to the wall of Bethshan in 1 Samuel 31:10. David brought Goliath's head to Jerusalem. Holofernes' head was hung from the parapet of Bethula, and that's in Judith. And 7 descendants of Saul were impaled at Gibeon on the mountain between the Lord. I remember that. The author of 1 Maccabees specifies that Nicanor's body is kept outside Jerusalem so as not to defile the city. And then on the date of this festival.
Yeah, the day of Nicanor
Yes.
was still being observed in Josephus's time
Yes.
and is listed in Megalat Ta'anit. Unlike the Feast of Dedication, it is no longer observed by Jews.
So here is a couple notes on that, actually. Surprisingly, the author does not mention that the Feast of Purim falls on the 14th of Adar. Since Adar falls around March, the battle took place either in March 161 or March 160. And then more on the on this feast, I guess. So the day was made a feast day and is mentioned in the Megalat Ta'anit, the scroll of fasting, which lists days on which fasting was not allowed. Historically, the importance of Judas's victory was that it gave Judas the confidence to send his embassy to Rome.
All right. Yeah, and here it says, apparently a source available to our author mentioned the interlude of peace between the day of Nicanor in March 161 and the death of Judas in mid-spring 160. If so, the interval must have been long enough to be worth mentioning. Indeed, within it fell the Jewish embassy to Rome. See introductory note to chapter 8. I'll do that in a moment. However, our author seems to have been misled by his ignorance on the differences between the dates of the Macedonian and Babylonian forms of the Seleucid era, so that he reduced the interlude to a few days.
Yeah, we talked about the issues with the two calendars he was probably using.
Yeah. And before I hand this off to you, there is a bit in the introductory note here that I find funny, so I'm going to read it.
All right, fantastic.
If chapter 8 had, by the way, that's the end of chapter 7. We're going into chapter 8.
Make sure you guys drop a like if you're enjoying the stream.
Yeah.
Subscribe, share it around.
Share it with your friends, family, neighbors,
Money
countrymen.
symbol.
Money. Yeah, all that. If chapter 8 had been omitted, no modern reader would have missed it. Nevertheless, it is an essential part of our author's narrative. The reference to Demetrius in the letter of the Romans later on firmly places the embassy to seek alliance with Rome in the reign of Demetrius I. Indeed, there is an independent evidence of a Jewish embassy to Rome in 161 BCE in the letter of the consul Gaius Fannius, son of Gaius, asking the officials of the island of Kos to see safe conduct of Jewish ambassadors returning home from Rome. The only consul, Gaius Fannius, son of Gaius, was Gaius Fannius Strabo.
Strabo, yeah, he was
Strabo.
He was a historian.
Consul in 161. Even without evidence of the letter, religious factors would guarantee.
Actually, I don't even know. Was that the same guy? I don't remember. Maybe they just had the same name.
Maybe.
But I know Strabo is the name of a historian.
Even without the evidence of the letter, religious factors would guarantee that our author was not mistaken in placing the embassy at this point. If material factors had been decisive, Judas would long since have sought Roman aid. Antiochus IV had been balked by Rome. Jews had received Roman support before against the regime of the co-regent Antiochus V. Rome had humiliated the regime of King Antiochus V, and Demetrius I took power over the opposition of the Romans. Religiously, however, Judas's decision to seek an alliance with Rome was as drastic a step as was Matthias's rebellion. See introduction. We're not going to look into the introduction, but Jewish victories had ended the persecution and, for the time being, had stopped the Seleucid government from imposing upon the Jews an impious high priest. Clearly, Jews could now resist royal wickedness. Were they free, however, to deny the king's sovereignty over them and to make a foreign alliance against him? God's prophets had strongly condemned such a step before, and punishment had been quick to follow. See Ezekiel, 2 Chronicles, and Jeremiah. To Judas and his men, the brilliant victory over Nicanor suggested that the Jews were indeed free to seek alliances inasmuch as God was with them. So, big political move.
Yeah, I mean, allying with the Romans, that's huge.
Yeah.
I feel like they take that back later, like in the New
Eventually,
Testament.
Yeah.
It becomes a problem. Here's some commentaries. Just
Yes, of
take them
course.
as you please. Here's a bookmark for
Oh, yes.
If you want that.
Wonderful.
Okay, so when we can finally hop in to chapter 8.
Yes.
And stop me whenever you want.
Okay.
The alliance with Rome. Judas had heard about the Romans, that they were a great power who welcomed all who wished to join them and established ties of friendship with all who approached them.
So this is something that chapters 9 and 8 have in common. 8:1 and 9:1 both begin with, quote, and Judas / Demetrius heard.
Yeah, so same syntax there.
Yes. But it's the same syntax because apparently it's a discussion of the reactions to the news of Nicanor's defeat.
All right. Sorry, I fucked that up already. As for their being a great power, Judas's informants told him of the Romans' valor in war. They had fought and conquered the Gauls and imposed tribute upon them. They had fought in the land of Spain, conquering the silver and gold mines there. They had conquered the whole region through their, fucking hell, what is this word? Sagacity? Is it sagacity? I have no idea.
It's Saga City.
Saga City. That is what it is. I've never heard that word before.
Yeah.
And perseverance. Probably sagacity, I don't know. And perseverance. Though it was a large area, far removed from Rome, and thus they had also overcome the kings who had come against them from remote quarters of the earth, defeating them heavily so that the survivors were still paying them annual tribute. Total takeover of the place. Really, this, I guess, was the beginning of the Roman Empire. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
They had defeated in battle and conquered King Philip and King Perseus of the Macedonians, who had attacked them. Even Antiochus the Great, king of Asia, was defeated by them when he went to war against them, though he had 120 elephants and cavalry and chariotry and a very large infantry force. I think there should be a note on the amount of stuff he had.
What verse is that?
Verse 6.
Verse
I think there should be some notes about how many elephants there were. I remember reading something about that.
6.
I'm also going to check in this commentary as well. Verse 6.
It doesn't say specifically about the elephants.
All right. Weird. I remember reading something about that.
But basically, I mean, it says that it has a few notes about stuff that we covered earlier. So earlier on, they described the brave deeds of the Romans.
Sure.
The same phrase is used to describe the actions of Judas, Jonathan, and Simon, forging a link between the Hasmoneans and the Romans, at least linguistically. These kings who came against the Romans in verse 4 may be an imprecise description of the great Carthaginian generals Hamilcar, Hasdrubal, and Hannibal, or it may introduce the following list of rulers to the east of Rome. The Romans had imposed indemnity payments or yearly tribute on Philip V of Macedonia, 1,000 talents to be paid over 10 years, and of 15,000 talents on Antiochus III. So they're going around. They're
Collecting tribute. Really, they're taking over. They're the new guys in town.
Yeah.
They're the new sheriff in town.
Yeah.
The Romans captured him alive and decreed that he and his successors on the throne should pay the Romans a heavy tribute and give hostages and be barred from the fairest of their domains. These domains the Romans took from him and gave to King Eumenes. The Greeks of mainland Greece, too, had planned an expedition to destroy the Romans, but when their plot became known to the Romans, they sent a single general against the Greeks and waged war on them, so that many of the Greeks fell slain, and the Romans took captive their wives and children, plundering their property, conquering their land, destroyed their fortresses, and reduced them to servitude down to the present day.
So the War of the Achaean League with Sparta in 146 led to war with Rome. The Achaeans were defeated by the Roman consul Lucius Mummius that same year, and democracy ceased to be the accepted form of government. In particular, Corinth was completely destroyed, and Mummius auctioned the women and children into slavery, broke down the walls, and confiscated the armaments of any city that had fought against Rome.
Did you happen to mention the year?
146.
Okay.
Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century CE, mentions that even in his day, the Romans still sent out a governor of Achaia. Thus, the description of the author of 1st Maccabees is generally correct, but quite anachronistic for the time of Judas.
Yeah, exactly. Our author here falls into anachronism. The War of the Achaean League with Rome came in 146, long after Judas was dead, and our author's description of the fate of the vanquished leaves no doubt as to what war he means. So there's that.
All right.
As for the remaining kingdoms and the islands, the Romans had reduced to ruin and servitude all who had ever opposed them. With their friends, however, and with those who relied on them, the Romans had maintained their ties of friendship and had conquered the kings both near and far, and all those who heard of the Romans feared them. So, you can already tell that it's going to be a political move to ally with them.
Yeah.
Because they're the Romans.
Yeah.
Those whom they chose to aid to be kings were... Okay, this is so terribly phrased. Those whom they chose to aid to be kings were kings. Of course they were. Those whom they chose to, they deposed. Thus the Romans had risen to great heights of power. Nevertheless, not one of them had sought self-glorification by putting on a diadem or wearing purple. Obviously very royal imagery there.
Right.
They had instituted a senate for themselves, in which every day 320 sat to deliberate continually over how to maintain the people's good order.
So
let's talk about that.
Yeah. Here in the NIB commentary, it says the number of senators was about 300 until Sulla in 81 BCE doubled the number. It is not known where the author got the number 320. By adding the magistrates to the 300 senators, or possibly an analogy to the Jewish Sanhedrin. The Senate did not meet daily, but only when summoned by the magistrates. Furthermore, Eerdmans says about the Senate. There was definitely something in here.
Yeah, there is, definitely.
Yeah. Ptolemy the 6th of Egypt against Antioch. Okay. Rome intervened on behalf of the Jews at Demetrius I's court. The author underlines Rome's republican constitution, though noting 320 senators instead of 300, and more surprisingly, one consul instead of two. The approval shown for the Roman avoidance of royal trappings may hint at a disapproval of the adoption of them by Jonathan and Simon. And similarly, the final note that they all heed the one man without envy or jealousy may hint at the problems faced by Hyrcanus or Janaeus.
Okay, let's continue.
Yes. I'll be right back.
Oh, my God. Fine. They entrusted their government and the ruling of all their territory to one man each year, everyone obeying him, without any envy or jealousy among themselves. Judas chose Eupolemus, son of John of the clan of Hakkoz, and Jason, son of Eleazar, and sent them to Rome so that the Romans might establish ties of friendship and alliance with the Jews. There's probably some relevance about being from the clan of Hakkoz, and lift from them the yoke, for they saw that the Seleucid Empire was imposing slavery upon Israel. They went to Rome, a very long journey, and came before the Senate and addressed it as follows. Judas Maccabeus and his brothers and the Jewish people have sent us to establish ties of alliance and peace with you, and to gain our enrollment as your allies and friends. The Senate accepted their proposal. The following is the text of the copy of the letter which the Romans engraved on bronze tablets and sent to Jerusalem for the Jews to keep there as a record of the ties of peace and alliance. And when Ruben gets back, we'll definitely talk about this tablet. So here's what the tablet says. Forever may there be peace between the Romans and the nation of the Jews on sea and land. May sword and enmity be far from them. If any aggressor wages war upon the Romans or upon any of their allies throughout their empire, the nation of the Jews shall give aid wholeheartedly as circumstances indicate. And to those at war with them the Jews shall not give or supply food, arms, money, or ships, as was agreed at Rome. The Jews shall carry out their obligations incorruptibly. In the same manner, if any aggressor wages war upon the nation of the Jews, the Romans shall give aid wholeheartedly, as circumstances indicate. And to those at war with them there shall not be given food, arms, money, or ships, as was agreed at Rome. The Romans shall carry out these obligations without deceit. On the foregoing terms have the Romans made a treaty with the Jewish people. If hereafter both sides shall agree to add or to subtract anything, they shall act according to their decision, and any such addition or subtraction shall be valid. As for the misdeed which King Demetrius is perpetrating against you, we have written him as follows. Why have you made your yoke weigh heavy upon our friends, our allies, the Jews? If they make any further complaint against you, we shall get justice for them by waging war on you by sea and by land.
Oof. That's both of them. I mean, there's no air yet here.
So let's talk about this a little bit. The ambassadors open their address by referring to the people, plethos, of the Jews, rather than to the nation.
Yeah, which is pretty important.
Right. Plethos sometimes translates the Hebrew congregation, but one should note how it had been used in 815 to refer to the Roman people. Verses 31 through 32 suggest that this is a letter being copied, although the full form of the letter is not present. The copy was presumably...
Yeah, because it adds on something else.
Yes. Presumably written in Latin or Greek, translated into Hebrew in the first edition of First Maccabees, and then translated into Greek for the extant text of First Maccabees. One should not expect to be able to reconstruct the exact wording of the document.
It'd be really cool if we could actually find the original document.
It would be cool. But it says...
History is a cruel thing. It will take away everything.
That's true,
you.
yeah.
It goes on to say... whatever the Maccabees might have thought, the relationship they had forged with the Romans was most probably not a treaty between equals. Rome most likely granted the Maccabees a friendship pact, which gave Judah the appearance of being protected by Rome, but did not necessarily mean that the Romans would indeed intervene to protect nations subject to other kings.
I think I have a note. I think I actually wrote something down in there.
Yes, you said CFNA something.
Oh, okay. So pretty much it's analogous to how the U.S. has always treated Native American treaties.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How, we have it, but
there is a law that literally was just said, well, not literally said, but it pretty much said, fuck the treaties. The treaties suck. We are the ultimate rulers.
They just wrote laws that said those old laws are nullified.
Yeah.
Those laws, both of them, the nullified ones and the ones that say they're nullified, are still there. Why? Because you have to have the notes that say they're nullified, as well as the notes that say they were legitimate. Oh, that's stupid.
Did you guys know that Chris was a legal historian?
Oh, yeah.
And he is also a lawyer as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm everything.
Chris, can I hire you for some lawyership?
Yeah, ask me a legal question, and then I'm going to tell you that's stupid. Hire a lawyer.
About this chapter, to someone who knows the future relations between Rome and Judea, this chapter is particularly poignant and ironic. That reader,
the next one?
Yeah, that was the end of 8.
Yeah, that reader knows that the Romans took control of Judea under Pompey the Great in 63 BCE, and after the failure of Herod the Great's son Archelaus in 6 CE, ruled Judea as a province. The Jews revolted against the Romans twice, first in the Great Revolt of 66 to 73 CE, and then in the revolt of Bar Kokhba in 132 to 135 CE. Both times they were defeated and crushed. In the first revolt, the temple in Jerusalem was burned and destroyed and not rebuilt. This destruction of the temple led to a major restructuring of Jewish life and traditions, for the temple had been where God had met the people and where the sacrifices commanded in Leviticus had been performed. No longer would those sacrifices be offered to God. And to this day, they still do not have a temple and do not offer sacrifices to God.
Blasphemy.
Presumably, once they eventually rebuild the temple within our lifetime,
Oh, yeah.
then they'll start sacrificing animals to God again.
And then it'll finally be proper.
And automation will help.
Yes.
It'll be automated.
Yeah. But there is a little bit in Eerdmans here that I want to go over.
Sure.
The standard format for treaties of friendship and alliance began by establishing peace, friendship, and alliance between the two parties. The second section prohibited the two parties from allowing enemy access through their land to the other party and from offering the obvious forms of assistance, food, arms, money, and ships to the enemy. A third section required mutual assistance in case of foreign aggression. Lastly, provision was made for alterations. Our treaty, verses 23 through 30, follows this pattern closely enough. The phrases, as Rome has decided, either corresponds to Latin censure, signifying senatorial approval to each clause, in which case the phrase could be placed at the end of verses 26 and 28, or indicates slight deviations from the norm required by the fact that Judea was not a free independent state, but already under the heavy obligations to her Seleucid rulers.
Yeah, I mean, it's taking tribute from everywhere, so.
Yes, it also says, verse 29 may be an intrusive gloss on the text.
All right. So why don't you hand me that?
There you go.
Thanks, buddy.
Yep. And now,
Hey, if you guys are enjoying the stream so far, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and especially you should share with your family, your friends, your dog, your cat, your neighbors, I suppose, prisoners in prison. Who else deserves to see this show? Everyone in Antarctica. So Landon, make sure this blows up in your favorite continent.
yes. Let's get into chapter 9, which is very long. Very long, actually.
Well,
How long
we
is
have
it?
we have commentary.
So long. When Demetrius heard that Nicanor and his army had fallen in battle, he proceeded again to send Bacchides and Alcimus back against the land of Judah, this time along with the right wing of the army.
So the right wing, Greek. Hold on, let me try to read this here. Oh, Corona. Dexion Keras. Literally the right horn. So the right wing in battle formation refers to the right flank of the army. We cannot be exactly sure what it refers to here. Metaphorically, it could mean the strongest part of the army.
Now, Goldstein. Goldman.
Really?
Look, it's an honest
Are they all the
mistake.
same to you?
There's gold in it anyway. Right wing and left wing belong to the standard vocabulary used by Greek and Roman historians for describing battle lines. A given military unit could be stationed on either side of the battle lines. Here, however, the term right wing should be capitalized since it clearly names a unit of the Seleucid army, probably one half of the phalanx. The phalanx was the massed infantry, the backbone of a Greco-Macedonian army. According to the figures at according to the figures at Polybius XXX 25.5, Antiochus IV's phalanx of Macedonians.
So 30, 25, 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Macedonians had 20,000 men in 166 BCE. See Bickerman Institutions. From verses 12 through 16, which we'll get to, one would judge that the elite right wing constituted half of Bacchides' infantry. In verse 4, we learn that Bacchides had a total of 20,000 infantry, so that one may infer that the Macedonian phalanx in 160 had the same number of men as it had in 166. In the winter of 161/60, had the Demetrius I defeated the rebel Timarchus, so that it was now possible to use so important a unit as the right wing against Judas. So it is significant.
Sure.
The right wing. They marched by way of Galilee and laid siege to Mesaloth in Arbela, captured it, and slaughtered many persons.
So let's talk a little bit about the geography here.
Yeah.
Because it might seem like a small point, but there's a lot of interesting textual stuff to go along with this.
Okay.
So this is from Erdmann's. Most commentaries following Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews have assumed that Arbela referred to Arbela on the western edge of the Sea of Galilee, and have therefore amended Gilgal to Galilee, which it's done following Josephus. Mesaloth has been understood as a noun meaning heights, and thus connected with caves in the hills near Arbela. Quota against Jerusalem probably suggests that Bacchides encamped near or within sight of Jerusalem, thence moving to Berea, and actually this we haven't gotten there yet, but to continue on the Arbela stuff and the Mesaloth stuff. The geography of this verse is difficult to reconstruct. As written, the Seleucid army is encamped at a town called Mesaloth in Arbela, but scholars have suggested that Mesaloth is a misunderstanding of the Hebrew word for public roads, which is Mesalot. Bacchides would thus have camped at a crossroad. Arbela was identified by Josephus with Arbela in Galilee, and some scholars have followed him and consequently amended Gilgal to Galilee. Other scholars have wondered why Bacchides would carry out a campaign in Galilee, from which the Jews had been evacuated back in 523, when his object was Judas and his force in the Judean hills. Thus, Bar Kokhba has suggested that Arbela should be corrected to Mount Bethel, the high plateau north of Ramallah, and the Gilgal refers to the road that ran from the ancient Gilgal near Jericho to a small village, Beth Ha-Gilgal, on the mountain plateau. Bacchides would thus have tried a new tactical approach, coming neither from the west as Saran, Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias had done, nor from the south like Lysias, but from the east.
Well, about Galilee and Mesaloth and Arbela, Goldstein says, this is Galilee, the reading of Josephus. The manuscript of First Maccabees have Gilgal, or Galad, Gilead. There were no Jewish targets left across the Jordan in Gilead, nor was there any other reason to go from Antioch to Jerusalem by way of Gilead. Gilgal played no role in Jewish history after the time of Hosea and Amos.
Amos.
Beth Hagilgal.
What?
Beth Hagilgal
Okay.
of Nehemiah 12:29 was an insignificant village near Jerusalem. No Arbela is ever associated with the road to Gilgal. On the other hand, there is an Arbela in Galilee, and Greek scribes wrote Galgala for Galilee at Joshua 22:10 and Galilee for Gilgal at Joshua 12:23. By mentioning the route through Galilee, perhaps our author wishes to stress that the route was different than that of the enemy in Isaiah 10:28 through 32. For Mesaloth and Arbela, it says, Josephus says that Maccabees besieged Jews who had taken refuge in caves. In the steep cliffs around Arbela, there are plenty of caves, and a considerable village of Jews could have grown up there and been named for the stepped paths leading up to it. The Hebrew mesalot means roads or perhaps stairs.
Well, that's something. But I think they talked about steeps in here. Yeah. Actually, hold on. We're gonna get into something a little bit later that could hit on that. So, anyways, let's continue.
All right. So they went through Galilee. In the first month of the year 152, they encamped against Jerusalem. However, they broke camp and marched off to Berith with 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. Judas had placed his camp at Elasa and had with him 3,000 picked men. When they saw how numerous was the army of the enemy, they were terrified. Many melted away from Judas's camp. Only 800 men remained. When Judas saw how his camp had melted away, the prospect of battle dismayed him. His heart sank because he had no time to rally them. Though discouraged, he said to his remaining men, "Up, let us advance against our foes. Perhaps we may be strong enough to fight them."
What verse was that?
That was verse 8.
Damn, I can't believe I've missed so much. I had a pretty interesting note on verses 5 and 6.
Okay.
So those who were too frightened to go into battle were supposed to have left the army already, according to regulations. See Deuteronomy 28. If you want to pull up Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 8. But these soldiers are terrified by the, quote, huge number of enemy forces, and they desert the camp, dropping off like leaves. The same verb, drop, is used at Isaiah 64:5 in a confession of sin.
And the officers shall speak further unto the people, and they shall say, "What man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return unto his house, lest his brethren's heart melt as his heart."
Sure. So the whole point was that dropping is like, kind of, I guess, in the same way it would be as wavering.
Mm-hmm.
Just away from the path of righteousness, what have you. So, and that language is used a lot. So the fact that they were dropping off like leaves is a very interesting way to phrase it. Mm-hmm. But anyways, let's continue.
They tried to dissuade him. Certainly we shall not be strong enough, they said. Rather, let us save our own lives now and come back with our brothers and fight them. Now, however, we are too few. Judas replied, "Far be it from me to do such a thing or to flee from them. If our time has come, let us die bravely for the sake of our brothers and not leave behind a stain upon our glory."
So on the phrase, "if our time has come," so it resonates with the lament of someone feeling without hope. Our time, and then he quotes Lamentations, "Our time has come, our days are filled up, our time is at hand." It's also attuned with Genesis 6:13. Thus the phrase foretells the end. No mention of help from heaven is made, for the author knows none will come.
For this section, Goldstein says, according to the prophecy at Enoch 9-36, Judas would remain invincible and would live to see the fulfillment of God's glorious promises. Our author seems to borrow the language of Jeremiah's reaction to false prophets from Jeremiah 23:9. "My heart has sunk," literally has broken, "within me." If so, he suggests that even Judas suspected that the prophecies were false. Nevertheless, Judas may have been obstinate in refusing to flee because of his belief in the prophecy of Enoch. Those who advised him not to fight probably included his brothers who survived. The fate of Judas would then be one more reason for our author's hostility towards those who claim to have prophetic revelations.
Yeah, and of course the author at this time thinks that the time of prophecy is it's just turned off for now. It'll come later, but it's turned off for now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I toggled it in console commands. It's been disabled.
I mean, you'd think God could do that.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Yeah, no,
like a
tell
little
the key,
on-off switch
disable,
for-
set value to 0 instead of 1.
Yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure it's just the switch.
It is. Yeah, set 0 to instead of 1. It's a switch.
No, but it's a magical one. It doesn't need
Right? Yeah, no.
It doesn't need a 0 to 1.
Magic circuitry. Got it.
Just
The army marched out from its camp, and they drew up opposite the Jews. The cavalry was divided into 2 units, and the slingers and archers marched ahead of the infantry, along with all the champions of the vanguard. Bacchides placed himself with the right wing. As the phalanx drew...
the right wing?
Yeah, the right wing.
Oh, man. That's the strong one.
Yeah. As the phalanx drew near along both ends of the front, they sounded the trumpets, and Judas's men too sounded theirs. The earth trembled from the din of the armies.
And that imagery pops up a lot, especially in the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
And really, anytime there's like a holy war type of deal.
Yeah. And they were locked in battle from morning till evening. Judas saw that Bacchides and the main strength of his army lay with the men of the right. Thereupon all Judas's stout-hearted men rallied to him, and the right flank broke before them. And the Jews pursued them as far as... ...
All right.
When the men of the left wing perceived...
What verse is that?
That is the end of verse 15. On this, it says... See above.
See on the sea above.
Oh, man, and it's like a 3-page thing. Okay.
Because I don't even have a note on that. In verse 15. That's a bummer.
Yeah. As far as the slopes or the mountains of ... And a word has been lost, perhaps Scopus or Jerusalem.
Actually, that's keep reading.
When the men of the left wing perceived that the right wing had been routed, they turned about and followed on the heels of Judas and his men, taking them in the rear. In the course of the fierce battle, many fell slain on both sides. Finally, Judas fell, and the surviving Jews fled.
Was that the end of 18?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. It might relate to the textual break there. So they retreat as far as Mount Azotus. You didn't have that in your reading, did you?
No.
So that's interesting. Mount Azotus is unknown, and the city of Azotus or / Ashdod is in the coastal plain. Scholars have suggested that the Greek translator read Ashdod rather than Asadot, meaning slopes. The slopes of the mountain could then refer to the area around Bethel. And then here are some further notes on Ashdod, because apparently I guess that's what was missing. The final pursuit took place down the steep slopes of the hills to the east. Also says nowhere near Ashdod, which was over a day's march to the west. This attractive solution makes good sense of the campaign. And actually, I think Ehrman's had a little bit more. So the Jews encamped at Elasa, only a kilometer from Al-Birah. Azotus, Ashdod, has no mountain, and in 1778, J.D. Maccabeus proposed for Hebrew Ad-Har Ashdod to the mountains of Ashdod, in original Ad Asadot Hahar to the slopes of the mountain, which has been widely accepted.
So now Judas is dead.
Yep.
And the surviving Jews ran away.
Yep.
Jonathan and
Oosh.
Simon took up the body of their brother Judas and buried him in the cemetery of his forefathers at Modane.
Interesting thing about Modane, that was actually a huge hub of Kabbalah
Oh,
a long time ago, yeah.
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Learned that while reading stuff for the Lilith video.
Excellent. They wept for him. Indeed, all Israel observed deep mourning for him. Plunged into grief for many days, they said, "How has our hero fallen, the Savior of Israel?" There is no written record of the other details of the history of Judas, his battles and his heroic deeds, and his personal greatness. There was simply too much to set down.
All right. Did you just finish the section there?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a little note here. On verse 22, scholars have pointed to the formula found found often in the Book of Kings. Now, the rest of the acts of Solomon,
Are they not?
all that he did, as well as his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon?
Oh, man.
So scholars have debated whether the author implies that he based his work on written or oral sources. One should note a significant difference, however, between this verse and the formula in the books of Kings. The acts of the various kings have been written down. This confession of being unable to record all the deeds of heroes at their death was a common classical literary device. The author of 1 Maccabees thus does not seem to refer to ancient records as in the books of Kings, but rather glorifies the magnitude of Judas's exploits. And so in this commentary, in the New Interpreter's Bible commentary, there are reflection sections, and usually it's just for stuff like what can we gather for this? What does it mean for us today? Moral of the story type of thing. But there's a very interesting note here in this reflection. The early Zionists would look back to Judas and the Hasmoneans as their heroes, for they had fought on, and when one died, another was there to take his or her place. Judas's was a movement that could not fail, for it depended not on him alone, but on the vision that his father had sparked in many minds. So I just thought that was interesting to know.
Yeah. To the next section of the chapter.
Yeah.
After the death of Judas, the wicked sprouted throughout the territory of Israel, and the evildoers flourished.
Love those wicked.
Yeah. At the same time occurred a very severe famine, so that the land went over to their side. Maccabees deliberately took upon the wicked men and placed them in power over the land.
So this section, it's going to talk about Jonathan, Simon, and John, and it's going to continue for a while. But either way, these chapters differ from the earlier chapters about Judas. The focus now is on politics and diplomacy rather than on the temple and the Jewish religion.
Mm-hmm.
There are fewer prayers and less poetry, and more letters and archives.
Thereupon they began to search and track down Judas's friends and brought them to Maccabees, who inflicted punishment and wanton torment upon them. Grievous trouble came upon Israel, such as had not occurred.
Did you just finish verse 24?
Yeah, I finished verse 24 before you said your thing.
Huh. All right. So on verse 24, sorry, I was looking through commentaries. On verse 24, this verse is frequently used as an argument that most Jews deserted Jonathan's cause because the government controlled the food supply and thus could entice people to its side. Given, however, the unusual meaning this would give to country, kora, as well as the penalty of sterility of the land as punishment for the sin in the Old Testament, one should not exclude the possibility of the authors suggesting that the famine symbolizes the rule of the godless over the land.
Grievous trouble came upon Israel, such had not occurred from the time that prophets ceased to appear before them. Then all the friends of Judas assembled and said to Jonathan, Since the death of your brother Judas, there has been no man like him to go forth against our enemies and Bacchides and against the internal foes of our people. Accordingly, we hereby choose you today to replace him as our commander-in-chief to carry on our war. On that occasion, Jonathan accepted the leadership and took the place of his brother Judas.
So here's something weird. Surprisingly, it's Simon. Simon was passed over in favor of the younger Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
From Erdman's, for the author of First Maccabees, this represented the lowest ebb of the post-prophetic age. Al-Smith and his supporters were no friends of prophecy. And then from the New Interpreter's commentary, unlike Judas, who was appointed by his father, Jonathan is elected to the position of ruler, which, of course, we can cross-reference Judges 10 and 11 for that.
Yes. And the next section of this chapter, which I believe is the last section of this chapter, is Jonathan as a guerrilla chieftain.
I had thought perhaps
Jonathan
Justin
as a guerrilla
was joking with guerrilla warfare, but no.
No, literally guerrilla warfare. Yeah. Okay, let's get into it. When the news reached Bacchides, he sought to kill Jonathan. When the report reached Jonathan and his brother Simon...
Okay, tell you what. Tell me when you get to the end of 49.
I'll tell you when. When the report reached Jonathan and his brother Simon and all his men, they fled to the desert of Thekoe and put their camp by the pool Bor Asphar. Then there's a missing section. I guess all of verse 34 is missing, actually. Yep.
Whoops.
There is no verse 34.
That's weird. Here's a note that actually includes verse 34. The attack on the Jambrites is framed by the two references to Bacchides that are very similar. That's 34 and 43. The first serves to locate Bacchides on the east bank of the Jordan, where he and his army can entrap Jonathan in Transjordan on his way back from Medeba to Judea.
It says here, I have omitted from my translation verse 34. When the news reached Bacchides on the Sabbath day, he marched with all his army to the other side of the Jordan. Though verse 34 clearly lay before Josephus and caused his entire version of the offense to be dislocated, it is a misplaced gloss on verse 43.
See, we're going to talk a little bit about that because apparently there's a good discussion about the construction of this section. So, yeah, definitely tell me when you get to the end of 49 because we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Shit, guys, it's already been an hour and 30 minutes.
Whatever. Also, if you're talking, you're talking to the mic.
You can't hear me when I'm way back there?
We could barely hear you.
I'm yelling at it. I thought you could. Oh, well.
Jonathan sent his brother in charge of the non-combatants with a request to his friends, the Nabateans, to let him leave with them for safekeeping for their cumbersome household goods. But the Jambrites of Medeba marched out, captured John and all that he had, and carried them off. Sometime thereafter, Jonathan and his brother Simon received a report that the Jambrites were about to celebrate an important marriage, escorting the bride, a daughter of one of the great nobles of blank, from Nadabath with a long procession. Mindful of the blood of their brother John, they went and hid under the cover of the mountain. As they looked out, they saw a loud throng with a heavy train of goods. The bridegroom came out to meet them with his friends and brothers to the sound of drums and singers and blank, but you get the picture. The Jews emerged from ambush and began to kill them. Many fell slain, and the rest fled to the mountain Jonathan and his men took all their goods as spoil. Thus their marriage celebration was turned into mourning, and the music of their singers into a dirge. Having avenged their brother's death, Jonathan and Simon and their men turned back toward the swamp of the Jordan Valley. Maccabees received the news and came on the Sabbath day to the banks of the Jordan with a large force. Jonathan said to his men, "Up, let us fight for our lives. Our plight today is like none before. Facing us in battle, behind us the river, the water of the Jordan, and on both sides swamp and thicket. There is no room to draw back. Now, therefore, cry out to heaven that you may be saved from the hands of our enemies." Battle was joined. Jonathan stretched forth his hand to strike down Maccabees, but Maccabees drew back to escape him. Thereupon Jonathan and his men leaped into the Jordan and plunged across to the other side. The enemy did not cross the Jordan to pursue them. Indeed, Maccabees lost that day about 1,000 men.
So that was the end of 49?
Yeah.
Okay, so a note on that.
Some guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, and then they ran away. The author tries to make the most of this sorry engagement by giving Jonathan a pre-battle speech similar to that of Judas at 3:18 through 22. Jonathan tries to embolden his men by stating that Maccabees acted in a cowardly way and by exaggerating the number of Seleucid dead. Jonathan, in fact, was lucky to escape alive. So, let's talk a little bit. I'm going to move this over here for now. On the construction of that section, there is quite a long note on this in Erdman's commentary. So, 9:32 to 49 become intelligible only after careful examination of the sequence of events and the topographical details. Two stories have been awkwardly combined. The first is Maccabees' pursuit of Jonathan, Simon, and their forces into the wilderness south of Jerusalem, and a subsequent engagement at the Jordan. The other concerns a dispute between the Maccabees and a Nabatean tribe, and a subsequent act of revenge. The flight of Jonathan and Simon to Tekoa on the edge of the Judean wilderness makes good sense. Abel, a scholar, identifies the pool of Asphar with cisterns at or near Kirbet Bir Ez Safaran, 5 kilometers south of Tekoa, which follows, 934, which follows, makes little sense at this point and is generally agreed to be a gloss based on verse 43. That was the omitted verse. In verse 35, Jonathan sends his brother, who on the evidence of verse 33 should be identified with Simon, but who turns out to be John. This suggests that verse 35 introduces a new episode not originally connected with verses 32 through 33. This whole episode, verses 35 through 41, took place in the region of Medeba east of the Jordan. It is the author who has linked it with Jonathan's flight to Tekoa and the Judean wilderness. The tale of revenge runs smoothly, except that Canaan is either a corrupt local place name or an attempt to identify the nobles with Israel's ancient enemy. The quote, "the old name excuses the massacre." That was a quote from a scholar. The Nadabath is otherwise unknown. It could be a corruption of Medeba, but why should this obvious name become corrupted here? In verse 41, the author illustrates the story with a reference to Amos 8:10. The problems begin with 9:42, where the author returns the Jews to the marshes of the Jordan, unmentioned so far in the story. 9:43, 44, and 48 give a confusing account of a battle on the banks of the Jordan. In which direction does Jonathan cross the river? In verse 48. The Greek, istoperan, in this context usually suggests eastward, in which case the battle was fought on the west bank. Jonathan retreated back across the Jordan, and Maccabees did not cross the Jordan. in verse 48. Bacchides almost certainly arrived, verse 43, at the west bank of the Jordan. This, in turn, allows us to make sense of verse 44. Quote, battle in front of us refers to Bacchides and his army. Battle behind us, however, seems unlikely. For if Jonathan was hemmed in by a river, a marsh, and a thicket, a flanking movement by Bacchides to attack Jonathan's rear would be impossible. The NEB repunctuates and translates the enemy in front, the water of Jordan behind, to right and left marsh and thicket. And apparently says also Goldstein. Thus, in verse 44, Jonathan has already crossed the Jordan from the east and has the river behind him, faces Bacchides in front, and has the jungle of the Zor on either side. The author has put the whole sequence together from several constituent pieces: the flight of the Maccabees from their usual haunts northwest of Jerusalem to the wilderness of Judea, their defeat at the banks of the Jordan by Bacchides, and their escape eastward across the river, and the attack of the Jambrites, and the subsequent act of revenge. This latter story is originally an independent and undated piece of tradition.
All right.
So there's that.
Yeah. After returning to Jerusalem, Bacchides fortified several towns in Judea with high walls, gates, and bars. The stronghold in Jericho, Amias, Beth-Horon, Bethel, Thamnatha, Parathon, and Tepho. He stationed garrisons in them to harass Israel. He also strengthened the fortifications of the town of Bethzur and Gazara and the Acra, and stationed therein troops and stores of food.
And of course, the Acra was that big fortress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He took the sons of the leading men of the country as hostages and put them under guard in the Acra in Jerusalem. In the year 153, in the second month, Alcimus issued an order to tear down the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary, thus tearing down the work of the prophets. Alcimus had already begun the work of having it torn down when he suffered a stroke which put an end to his project. Unable to open his mouth and paralyzed, he could no longer speak or issue a will for his family. So died Alcimus in great agony on that occasion. On finding that Alcimus was dead, Bacchides returned to the king. The land of Judah was undisturbed for 2 years. Then, however, all the wicked formed a plot. They said, Jonathan and his men now live confident and undisturbed. Let us now have Bacchides come and arrest them all in a single night. They went and presented their plot to Bacchides. Bacchides set up with a strong force, sending secret messages to all his confederates in Judea to arrest Jonathan and his men. But they failed because their plot became known. Thereupon, they seized about 50 of the men of the country who had been ringleaders in the evil plot and put them to death.
What verse are you on?
I just finished 61.
Okay.
Jonathan and Simon and Jonathan's men withdrew to Beth-Basi in the desert.
So, hold on. I probably should add something onto verse 61 here.
Okay.
So although Bacchides is said to have come with a large force, it is clear from his later failure to capture Beth-Basi that it was not the force with which he first came to Judea. This is also evident from the way he tries to get Jonathan first through allies who were already in place in Judea. The sequence of events is difficult to reconstruct. The NRSV has Jonathan's men kill 50 leaders of this treachery, this literally evil. This translation presumably understands the last phrase as referring to those who had tried to capture Jonathan, but the Greek has no change in subject from verse 60, where Bacchides' allies are told to seize Jonathan, and verse 61, where the same verb is used to describe the seizure of the 50 leaders, and Jonathan is not mentioned until verse 62. Therefore, the reader may presume that Bacchides' allies tried to seize Jonathan, but when they couldn't, they seized instead 50 men from the countryside, whom they credited with being associated in some way with the damage Jonathan was doing. These 50 might be compared to the 60 Hessidians who had sought to make peace with Bacchides and Alcimus.
All right. Jonathan and Simon and Jonathan's men withdrew to Beth-Bassi in the desert. Jonathan had the ruins there rebuilt, and they fortified the place. When the news reached Bacchides, he assembled all his manpower and summoned all his supporters from Judea.
Tell me when you get to the end of 68.
Okay. He marched and laid siege to Beth-Bassi. For many days he pressed the attack and constructed siege works. Jonathan left his brother Simon in the town and slipped out into the countryside. Accompanied by a few men, he went and blank. Odomai and his brothers and the Phazaronites at their encampment, so that they began to harass and attack Bacchides' troops. Then Simon and all his men sallied forth from the city and burned the siege works. In battle with Bacchides, they defeated him, causing him great chagrin, because his strategy and his expedition had been frustrated. That's the end of 68.
All right. So the course of the siege is confused. The NRSV suggests that Jonathan leaves Beth-Bassi with a small force, fights against some otherwise unknown nomadic tribes, and then turns back to attack Bacchides, a rather circuitous route to raise the siege. The text is difficult to reconstruct. One is not sure whether to read singular or plural verbs. The main problem lies in the verb struck down. The sense, of course, another, godly kind of language there. The sense of the passage would seem to be that Jonathan slipped away from the siege to gain allies, as those in the citadel had done against Judas's siege. Jonathan had friends among the Nabateans, if not among the Jambrites, as had Judas before him. And so he may have gone for reinforcements to Odomai and the people of Phaseron, and, quote, placed them beside him, a verb attested by some Greek manuscripts. At verse 67, then, Jonathan's small group, plus his reinforcements, begins to attack Bacchides' force from the rear, while Simon sallies out from the town and crushes Bacchides' group. That was that.
All right.
For now, yeah.
I totally forgot about the appendixes back here.
Oh yeah,
There's so
they're
many
there.
of them. Ugh. All right. Furious at the wicked men who had advised him to come to our country, he put many of them to death, and with his men decided to return to his own land. When this news reached Jonathan, he sent an embassy to Bacchides to negotiate with him a treaty of peace and secure the return of their prisoners. Bacchides consented to his proposals and carried them out. He swore to Jonathan that for the rest of his life he would never seek to harm him, and he returned to Jonathan the prisoners he had previously taken from the land of Judah. Then he returned to his own land and no longer marched across their borders. Israel ceased to be at war. Jonathan dwelt at Maccabeus and began to judge the people and to wipe out the wicked from Israel. And just about this last verse here, because that is the end of chapter 9, there's a note in here that says, the beginning of our verse may be an allusion to Psalm 46:10, with our author's characteristic avoidance of naming God. By moving to Maccabeus, or Maccabeus, something like that, Jonathan and his band had a base at a strong point in the hill country, which had been Judas's stronghold. No longer could the fortified towns mentioned in verse 50 block the band from access to that territory. In days of yore, Maccabeus had been a base for an incipient Israelite kingdom, 1 Samuel 13:2. and had also been the scene of an Israelite victory through the valor of an earlier Jonathan, 1 Samuel 14:5 through 31. On Jonathan as...
You know who Jonathan was real cozy with? It was David.
Oh, yeah.
Him and David had something going on.
Yeah, they definitely did. On Jonathan as judge, as above, our author may view Jonathan, the man who wiped out the wicked and purged Israel's dross, as a worthy successor of Josiah. See 2 Kings 23:24. And as a fulfillment of Isaiah 1:25 through 26. Indeed, Isaiah goes on in 1:27 through 28 to predict the liberation of Jerusalem and the rout of the wicked, exactly as we find them in 1 Maccabees 10:7 through 14, which we'll get into next week.
Sure. And also a little bit on this last verse. So, of course, government remained in Seleucid hands in spite of the author's idealized picture of Jonathan as a judge of the people. There is no indication that the Seleucids appointed a successor to Alcimus until Alexander Ballas appointed Jonathan in 152 BCE. Actually, here's something interesting. Sometimes he was... hold on. Though Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews, wrongly gives Judas a stint as high priest, and H. Stegeman and others have suggested that the gap was filled by the teacher of righteousness known from some Qumran documents. So the teacher of righteousness in the Qumran scrolls was kind of a messianic figure, who, of course, was, a priest and, rabbi, very intelligent person, teacher of righteousness. So here's the thing. There was a period of time where we don't really get told that much about, and the note here from the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary is what one would like to know is what Jonathan was doing from 157 BCE to 152 BCE when First Maccabees resumes the narrative. I also would like to know.
We all would like to know. But unfortunately...
Apparently, at this point in time, they were having a problem finding priests.
Apparently.
Yeah. They were having some real issues getting people to be all preachy and stuff.
Well, the last one had a stroke.
Yeah, well, either way, it's still... there's like a 5-year gap in there.
Yeah.
You have enough time to find somebody.
Definitely.
Yeah. Either way, thank you, everybody, for joining us for the show today. And it was longer, but we have a whole other commentary now.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty good commentary, honestly.
And you know what?
What's that?
Once we get to 2 Maccabees, we're going to have a whole other commentary.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, boy.
Wow.
Yeah, we're going to have
be professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to know everything that there is reasonably to know about 2 Maccabees.
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
Either way, if you guys enjoyed the stream, drop a like, subscribe, share to your mom and your dad. And
yeah, all your friends, family, neighbors, animals.
Anyone once removed, all the once removed, twice removed relatives.
Especially all those people that show up to family picnics that you haven't seen since you were a child.
Yes.
Yeah, those family reunions, that's the time to drop the
subscriber. No, it's got to be a picnic.
A picnic? What if it's a reunion that's a picnic?
No.
That's fine,
no.
But it has to be a picnic. Okay, so either way, on Sunday we're going to have Landon on the show.
Yeah, and we'll be able to thank him.
Yeah, we will. That's true.
Even though you said we wouldn't.
That never happened. Either way, until next time, or until we get a new thingamabobber.
I mean, this one still works.
I know.
We will see
but
you
we'll see you on Sunday.
Sunday.
We still need